This is our 14th class of quantum psychotherapy. We are completing our 7th weekend, whose topic is quantum emotional, quantum cognition, theories, and therapies. So our today's topic is quantum cognitive theory principles and cognition processes. What are these cognition processes? Quantum cognition processes are mental activities using principles of quantum probability theory rather than classical logic standard probability to model human thought, human judgment, and human decision making to explain behaviors that appear irrational or paradoxical under classical logic, and to explain why human thought often defies classic logic. Quantum cognition processes are best understood through real-world scenarios where classical logic fails and how you as a human being succeeds. And quantum cognition processes are how we think, how we perceive, how we make decisions, recall memory, and solve problems. So how the quantum way does it is different from what classical logic does it. So to understand these quantum processes in these areas, it helps to view the mind not as a calculator performing fixed sums, but as a system of waves that overlap, interfere, and settle into a state where a choice is forced. Think of a scenario where you are torn between two big life choices: moving for a job or staying because you want to stay with the family. You aren't just undecided. You are in the superposition, holding both potentialities at the same time simultaneously. So you exist both. You exist in both realities until the moment a decision is made, whether you are going to move for a job or to stay with your family, which collapses the wave into a single physical path. This is quantum cognition process. So we will delve into examples of quantum processes in these 5 main areas of human thought, human perception, human decision making, human memory recall, and human problem solving. So let's begin with the quantum cognitive process of thought. If you are in classical thinking model, your thought is like a file on a hard drive, and your mind acts as a hard drive, and your brain as a structured database. For example, your last year's Christmas trip is a file stored in your long-term memory, and your brain has a discrete file labeled Christmas trip. When you are asked about your trip for Christmas last year, your brain opens the file and reads the data back to your conscious mind without altering the original record. And when the file is opened, the data inside doesn't change whether you open it on a sunny day or a rainy day or after reading a bad news story. The environment may make it harder to find the file, but the data inside the file is static. And this classical model assumes that the observer, who is you, and the object, which is the memory, are separate. And in this way, Your current mood is just noise that might distract you from reading the file, but it does not rewrite the code of the memory. However, the quantum cognitive perspective argues that there is no Christmas trip file at all. Instead, there is your memory of the Christmas trip in a wave function, in a state of potential, a cloud of possibilities that changes every time you look at it. And this cloud of possibilities is a state of superposition. And you don't have one Christmas trip file. You have a cloud of potential memories, some romantic, some stressful, some boring, all existing at once in a state of potential. So, before you think of it, the memory of the Christmas trip exists in superposition in a blurry cloud of all possible versions of that trip. And you don't have one fixed opinion. You exist as a superposition of all the good, the bad, and the boring that happened last year on your Christmas trip. And when you think of the Christmas trip, the act of remembering is observation. And your current mode and the person you are talking to act as the environment that forces the wave to collapse into a specific version of the story. So your current environment acts like a filter, an interference that shapes that wave. And in the quantum cognition model, the observer that is you and the object, which is the memory, are entangled and interfering with each other, and they are not separate. They are one and all together. So if you are currently feeling lonely, that environment interferes with the Christmas wave, amplifying the sad moments, canceling out the happy ones. So, in quantum cognition, observer effect states that the act of observing a particle fundamentally changes its state. So, when we apply this to human thought, the act of asking a question creates it by collapsing a cloud of possibilities. The observer forces the brain into a specific framework, which is romance, because you were not feeling lonely, you were feeling ecstatic. If your current mode is hilarious. So in quantum cognition, our thoughts behave more like interfering waves rather than fixed data points. And a thought is like a wave in the ocean. Classical thinking, on the other hand, treats ideas like folders in a filing cabinet, while quantum cognition treats them as entangled variables. In classical thinking, a thought is like a file on a hard drive, and in quantum cognition, a thought is like a wave in the ocean. So thoughts aren't a collection of yes or no switches, but a fluid landscape of probability that solidify only when we are forced to make a choice. So before we make a choice, we don't have one fixed opinion. We exist in a superposition of being this or being that or being the other, all at once as a wave of possibilities. So quantum cognition views our state of mind as a coherent superposition, allowing for creativity. And we haven't collapsed into one meaning yet. and our mind can find a third impossible idea in the overlap between the two. So the moment we get it, the wave function collapses and we are left with a single idea. Classical thinking, on the other hand, says that superposition is a temporary confusion as we wait for the truth. But quantum cognition says that superposition is the source of human intelligence, where we hold conflicting, paradoxical, and complex ideas all at the same time simultaneously without the system crashing. And quantum cognition suggests that our minds don't just retrieve an answer from a hard drive. We construct an answer in real time based on the environmental context. And human thought is sensitive to its environment, and one's choice depends entirely on the framing, on the mood, and the preceding information rather than fixed internal possibilities. Let us look at perception now. Perception is another quantum cognition process. And quantum cognition models perception not as a passive recording of data, but as an active contextual process where information exists in a state of superposition, multiple possibilities before collapsing into a single defined percept upon observation. And it uses quantum probability theory to describe how context, uncertainty, and attention interact to shape sensory input, often explaining cognitive biases that classical probability models struggle to account for. So perception is another process of the mind, collapsing ambiguous data into a single reality. And the act of perceiving with your senses causes a collapse into a single stable reality. And the brain doesn't process sensory input as a rigid binary classical calculation, but as a superposition of possibilities, maintaining those possibilities simultaneously in superposition until a final percept or decision is made. 3 people might right now be looking at the tip of Mount Everest. One will say it is white. Another one will say it is blue. Another one will say it is red, depending on the reality they have chosen to collapse. So the quantum model of perception suggests that before a conscious stable perception is formed, the brain handles ambiguous input by holding a range of potential interpretation. And perception flips between 2 or more possibilities, possible quantum interpretations. So before the brain settles on one interpretation, it exists as a superposition of both. And the act of measuring, of observing, of focusing attention causes a collapse into perceiving one state before transitioning back to the superposition, which allows the alternate state to appear. So sensory input isn't fixed objective data. It exists as a state of superposition until context, that is mood, memory, or attention, collapses them into a specific experience. For example, you are sleeping at night, and in the middle of the night, you hear a neutral sound like a tapping on the window. You can perceive it as a threatening intruder, or you can perceive it as a harmless branch, depending on the context of fear or safety. I hope this has been understood very well. So the brain acts as an observer that forces the ambiguous sensory input into one of these two outcomes based on the internal contextual state of fear or safety. Let's look at the third quantum cognitive process of decision making. So, quantum cognition models human decision making using quantum probability, providing an alternative to classical probability models, where the decision making process is based on considering the probability of different outcomes rather than aiming for a deterministic prediction to better account for uncertainty and adaptive decision making in complex, ambiguous, uncertain environments. And it explores how cognitive processes and decision making give insights into phenomena that classical probability theory struggles to explain. And it explores how people make decisions under uncertainty and how their preferences can change based on the framing of choices. So quantum cognition provides a framework for modeling situations where one considers multiple options simultaneously, even when these options are conflicting or context dependent. And this is different from classical decision models, which assume a single well-defined preference at any given time. And superposition in decision making allows one to hold multiple potential choices concurrently. And probabilities of different outcomes emerge when the choosing collapses the cognitive superposition into a specific decision. So deciding whether to purchase a high-price house or a cheaper alternative of 3 houses for the same price. This is an example we are going to use today. So in classical modeling, you are assumed to prefer one or the other at any instant. However, in quantum cognition, your mental state is a superposition of preferring a high-price house and a cheaper alternative. And committing to a decision collapses this superposition into a single choice. So context, like the price, like how the display is done, or the mood you are in, or the social influences of the people who are telling you this and that, can shift the superposition state, changing the likelihood of each choice. So with entanglement between decisions, if preferences for buying a house and a car are entangled, they can't be treated as independent. A change in one decision can instantaneously affect the probabilities of outcomes for another. So buying a luxury car may reduce the budget available for the house where you had two possibilities of buying an expensive house or opting for 3 houses that are at the same price, but you're getting 3 houses instead of one. So I hope we have understood that. So when we look at another quantum cognitive process of memory recall, and this is very dearest to my heart. Quantum phenomena could influence various cognitive processes, including memory recall. And studies have shown that quantum-like interactions in the brain may shape how we process and recall information, suggesting that consciousness might exhibit quantum processes. So this quantum challenges traditional cognitive models and opens up new avenues for understanding memory and cognitive functions. So unlike classical models that assume deterministic or purely probabilistic mental state, quantum models treat memory retrieval as context dependent. Let's give an example. Imagine you are recalling an event or information from prenatal memory. The cognitive system can be thought of as being in a superposition of multiple potential memory traces, such as a pleasant, emotional, or physical sensation, as well as prenatal trauma. So postnatal recall arises from superposed quantum states collapsing upon a sensory, emotional, or contextual trigger into some quantum states, explicit memories, and conscious recognition or emotional re-experiencing of a prenatal event. And one prenatal memory collapses into conscious awareness depending on a current mode. So linked events may resurface simultaneously, creating vivid emotional and perceptual appearances. And the collapse depends on context and current mental state. And you might feel deep grief while still in your mother's womb, or joy when recalling a prenatal memory, when you would feel ecstatic when your mother was happy and smiling. So the current mood state that you are in right now, you might feel a deep grief while still in your mother's womb when she was shouted at by a neighbor, or you may feel joy when recalling a prenatal memory that was pleasant when your mother was smiling and joyous. So the current mood state that you are in as a 30-year-old man or woman acts as a quantum amplifier, enhancing the coherence of entangled mental states, enabling vivid re-experiencing of that particular prenatal memory. So in quantum cognition, memory is not viewed as a file being retrieved from a hard drive. The recall is a reconstructive process where the act of remembering creates the memory in its final form. And in the superposition of traces, where instead of one fixed memory could hold a cloud of potential memories, you don't have a memory of your childhood home. You have a superposition of all the times you saw it. And the specific memory you recall now is a collapse of what? That wave based on your current mode. So when we look deeply into entangled childhood memories, memory entanglement arises when two or more memories, often from early life, are deeply linked, such that recalling one automatically triggers elements of the other. And these associations could be a new home and abandonment. This is an example now. Imagine as a child, you experienced parental absence while moving homes for the first time. And recall of a new home automatically evokes feelings of abandonment, of insecurity, and unfamiliarity, even in the episodes that originally seemed neutral. So when there is an entanglement of memory, they aren't stored in isolation. These concepts are entangled, meaning that the state of one cannot be described without the other. Think also of another example of your first day at school paired with a specific scent of chalk dust or anxiety emotion. Smelling chalk decades later or right now may reinstantiate the original anxious state along with visual spatial elements showing cross-modal entanglement. Another example. Imagine witnessing domestic conflict while being comforted by a favorite toy. This toy and the trauma are entangled. And seeing the toy later, after 20 years, can elicit a stress response not directly related to the object itself. Now let us look at another quantum cognitive process of problem solving. In one of the fundamental human cognitive processes, the brain searches for a solution for a given problem or finds a path to reach a given goal. So the quantum realm operates beyond classical constraints, allowing for solutions to exist that aren't accessible through traditional thinking. And it's like tapping into a vast, interconnected field of possibilities. Solutions might exist beyond current understanding. Shifting perspectives, changing how we approach problems can reveal new answers. And accessing collective or universal knowledge. Research shows that we often rely on gut feelings when we are solving problems, indicating a need for better conceptual reasoning. So problem solving involves superposition, considering multiple positions and solutions at once. So entanglement, looking for interconnected solutions, and probabilistic thinking that explores solutions with various likelihoods of success. So quantum-inspired solutions are needed for an incompetent assistant. And superposition considers multiple outcomes at once. This is another example. Imagine you are a human resource officer and a quantum-inspired solution is needed for this incompetent assistant in your organization. And superposition considers multiple outcomes at once, like retraining and retaining and retraining, or reassigning this incompetent manager to a different role or terminating him or her. So a superposed position or solution can be to offer retraining and start searching for a potential replacement. And entanglement links training gaps and team dynamics. And a solution can be an entangled performance review involving team members to understand the root causes. So for probabilistic thinking, we assess likelihoods of success for each outcome. And the solution can be to assign probabilities to success of retraining versus replacing. So problem solving involves a quantum leap rather than a step-by-step logical progression. And classical problem solving is like a ball rolling through a landscape, trying to find the lowest valley, the solution. If it hits a hill or a mental block, it stops. But quantum logic is modeled as a quantum walk. And unlike classical random walk step by step, a quantum walk explores all possible paths across a mental heuristic space simultaneously. And this allows the solver to tunnel through a mental block that classical logic couldn't go through, leading to a sudden insight. And unlike classical step-by-step logic, that random walk, a quantum walk explores all possible solutions simultaneously. And this models the aha moment, where a sudden leap of insight allows a person to tunnel through the mental blocks that classical deduction could not overcome. So as we end this presentation, let's look at applied cognitive processes, those quantum models that are used to explain several cognitive processes. The first model is conceptual reasoning, and it explains how concepts are combined in ways that don't. Let's look at those quantum models that are used to explain several cognitive processes. And the first quantum model is conceptual reasoning. And it explains how concepts are combined in ways that don't follow standard logic, leading to new predictions about human judgment. And the second quantum model is perception. And it models how the brain interprets ambiguous visual information like the vase or face illusion by treating the initial perception as a superposition of multiple images. The third quantum model is memory retrieval. It explains how memory can be accessed in ways that are not strictly linear, and it addresses over and under effects where traditional models fail to capture the context-sensitive nature of retrieval. And the fourth quantum model is decision making. It uses models irrational choices that violate classical probability, such as preferring immediate gain over long-term sustainability. And decision-making uses decision-making under uncertainty models human behavior where classical logic fails. And finally, before we end, let us look at the key principles of quantum cognition. And the first principle is superposition, the indefinite state. Cognitive states are modeled as existing in multiple potential states at once until a decision is made. And this pregnant moment represents a state of uncertainty where multiple interpretations coexist before collapsing into a single choice. And before a decision is made, the one may hold multiple contradictory opinions or options simultaneously. The second principle is entanglement or non-separability. Seemingly separate cognitive processes can become so correlated that one directly influences the state of the other, transcending linear reasoning. So cognitive processes or cognitive systems can be connected in ways that make the state of one part inseparable from the other, where assessing one component affects the perception of the whole. A third principle is interference or probability waves. And the probability of an outcome can be altered by simultaneous presence of other cognitive states. And human reasoning combines probabilities where different possibilities can interfere with each other, leading to violations of classical probability. The fourth principle is contextuality, context dependence. Cognitive states are not absolute, but dependent on the context of the observation or attention, and human judgments are influenced by the environment. And our last principle is complementarity or incompatible variables. And certain mental states or questions cannot be considered at once. Answering one question changes the context, which directly alters the response of a subsequent question. And this is about order effects. So asking, for example, how satisfied are you with your life? This is a general, broad question. Before, how satisfied are you with your job? Which is a specific domain question. So in a classic example of question order effects, often leading to assimilation or contrast effects in mental state reporting. So this sequence dictates how the respondents construct their judgments of satisfaction by influencing the information, which information is activated in their mind first. How satisfied are you with your life? If this is asked before, how satisfied are you with your job? So it yields a lower correlation than if asked in reverse. How satisfied are you with your job? How satisfied are you with your life? If asked about their job first, they are primed to think about work when answering the general question. So as we end this presentation today, this is the question I'm leaving with you. Become aware of the quantum processes of your own thought, your own perceptions, your own decisions, and how you recall memories and how you find answers to insolvable issues. Journal those insights you get and how you can use these insights to help your clients, to help those patients, those parishioners, or the people you serve or live with in a community or congregation. Thank you so much for listening. Have a nice evening and peaceful night.